Today's show is sponsored by Yafa Bay and her Spirit of Tepereth Metaphysical Marketplace, here to provide you and your naturally special gifts with guidance and support through your life's journey, providing you tools such as candles, incense, charms, jewelry, oils, crystals, and much more. Visit them at 1273 West Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, or online at spiritoftepereth.com. You can find all our sponsors' information in the show notes on our website. Now let's start the show.
The controversial group leading the charge, ADOS, or the American Descendants of Slavery. The controversial group ADOS, ADOS, or the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS, ADOS, the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS, the controversial group ADOS.
Welcome to the Articles of ADOS podcast, a weekly show where we bring you undiscussed news, articles, and information important to the American Descendants of Slavery, our friends, and our allies. You can find us every Friday, 10 a.m. on WCRS 92.7 and 98.3 here in Columbus, Ohio, or as always, you can listen on your favorite podcast app. This is episode 31. I'm your host, Lisa Todd, along with my co-host,
Daud Giazan. On today's show, we will share articles from Democracy Now!, Yahoo News, Triple Pundit, The Atlantic, CNN, and Law 360. Later in the show, stay tuned for our main event, where we dive into and interview the news report entitled Bree Newsome and Professor Eddie Glaude, The Black Lives Matter Movement Helped the Democrats Defeat Trump.
Personality. Peace. This week in our personality piece, I'm going to pose a question that forces us to have personalities.
Okay, what questions do you have for us this week?
How excited are we for the new Biden-Harris term?
Not so much.
I know there are plenty of cons, to choose from, but are there any pros?
Well, the easy and obvious good one is symbolism. Symbolism of a white male, black female, working together to bring change, needed change to America. That's making people dance in the streets, I've heard.
So in terms of their new administration, elect, put it that way because it ain't certified yet, but I don't see that it won't be certified.
I don't doubt it either.
I'm finding it hard to come up with a pro.
Oh, there's several pros.
Well, I mean, I understand the symbolism part,
yeah.
And
well, there's other ones too. Wealthy people are going to get wealthier. I mean, that's a pro. And when I share what I've got to share at the end, you're going to see why in a strange way. It's weird and it's messed up, but it's gonna ring a bell. The property class are going to continue to prosper because of the Biden-Harris ticket. That's a pro for them. It may be a con for us. Another pro is that we'll have a little bit more symbolism, but in the form of a racism being institutionally run and justified, or we are trying the best we can through the Biden-Harris ticket. That means things that continue to be institutionally racist towards us, like fully functioning police with no limits to their abusive behaviors, it'll be seen as they'll come in and make things right. Like Obama, they'll make gestures and make statements and things, but we know they're going to be fully funded. Militarism of the police was highly a priority of the Obama years, and that means Biden. And so Biden is going to continue that trend, sadly. That's going to be good for marketers of weapons. So that's a positive. It's going to be positive for the economy in some ways, because he's going to do things to bend to the power and interest of white elites. That may help people to bounce back a little more, but nothing definite though, but that's still a little bit of a positive.
Which confuses me because there's always this mantra that the Republicans and especially Trump was so good for the economy and the stock market, and
it's always been a lie. It's a business lie.
So, apparently people that buy stocks like Biden as well, because nothing changed as far as the stock market this week.
Matter of fact, they were more relaxed because it was apparent he was going to come out on top.
Which makes opposite sense, because I thought that they preferred Trump's economic policies. Why would it be up for Trump
because
as well? Then?
because there's segments of the wealthy class that always don't agree with other segments of the wealthy class. Things have a better chance of changing when they're in greater disagreement. These days they're more unified than usual, and so but the overall reaching elites didn't like Trump's undermining their agenda, so they have more aligned against him. That's why the cheating he did to win the last time, which didn't get any coverage for the obvious reasons, he's been out cheated this time, powered by these same white elites, both international and national elites who wanted Trump out of there. Another symbol thing is that we have, as I said earlier, a symbolic image that they did not like in Trump, is that his blatant narcissistic attitude and behaviors and his obvious and observable and documented white domination racism wasn't really liked by these guys. Now, they don't mind racism. They just don't like being seen as being racist. And that's hit so many whites in among the collective at their core, is that, yes, this system has been racist. It has been institutionally racism. You can't have institutional racism without time to develop it. So they're coming in love with that term. That means through the Obama years, there was racism going on, through the Bush years, through the Clinton years, through the Bush senior years. So it's been going on, and now they have to face that, but they don't want to face it with such an ugly image of a guy who's actually being that thing.
Right. So
the psychological need to get him out of there.
So still, yep, nope.
Which they see as a pro.
Yeah, I'm still not seeing any pros. It was a rhetorical question.
I understand, but I can go there. I can argue even opposing.
I see. You being nice to him right now. You're giving them little brownie points.
I believe I'm being practical in that observation.
Well, what I mean is, you're not pessimistic as I am. I have zero hope in this administration. I don't see anything good other than maintaining the continuation of racism, status quo, just dying down and keeping people quiet about what's going on in issues. Like Obama literally said, "Shut up and stop complaining."
Yeah, I know, and they took it too.
So
those Negroes took it.
Yeah, so that's that, and then so I'm surprised. I am more pessimistic in the sense.
I'm being practical in the sense of the question wasn't.
No. I like it. To me, it's sarcasm.
Yeah, it is
a little bit.
But at the same time, it's from the perspective of who owns the country, not from the perspective of Americans, particularly not the perspective of ADOS Americans. From ADOS Americans, it is symbolically good for the reasons I gave, but in terms of material, tangible returns, it's proposing, it's offering the candidacy of Biden and Harris offers more dread.
All the people know is not going to be Trump doing it, though.
It's just not going to be Trump doing it. Clinton was making the lives of immigrant Haitians horrible to get them not to want to come here. So you make their conditions horrible. So there were no cages.
The process, right? Okay.
They placed them in detentions where there was nothing but hard concrete, and they would allow the children to play near barbed wire. What do you think would happen as a result of that? There were hundreds of injuries as a result of that, but we didn't get to hear about it. I read it because I read alternative press. He was trying to make their lives miserable because that was a way to get them to go back. Clinton to Bush through Obama ratcheted up by getting the cages and stuff, which and the mass deportations. He was called deporter in chief. People it still goes over their head.
Did he ever close Guantanamo? What was
no,
that?
it's still going on.
What was that?
He was supposed to come in and close.
Jr. started, and then
he was supposed to come in and change Guantanamo. No, all we got with Obama was.
Is it still there?
It's still there.
Wow.
It's off the radar because Trump has been so crazy, but the Obama was a continuation of Bush, and Bush was a continuation of Clinton. That means there's a singular mentality going on here that's effervescent. The only hitch to that has been Trump. He's not been totally on board, which is the reason why they have wanted him out of there. Thus, the Russia hacking gate lie. Thus, the attempted impeachment. All of them were to get him diverted and put pressure on him to do their will. He did not create more wars. This is what Hillary would have done. She would have ratcheted up the Cold War with Russia, Trump
North
wouldn't
Korea.
do that. Trump wouldn't do that, but he has done other things to appease them that have ratcheted things up with Russia. And then you mentioned that one there.
Mm-hmm.
We were supposed to give him our butt size to kiss.
Mm-hmm.
He goes in and acts dumb. So he goes in and acts like a diplomat. In some ways, Trump has been good for America in that sense. He hasn't ratcheted up the weapons industry as much, but he's continued it in other ways.
Which is really anti-Republican.
It is, and he's continued the Jones strikes. Like I said, there's been a molding, a white elite unification in terms of policy, both international and domestic. Trump undermined that, which is why he had to be drummed out of there, preferably, and this time cheated and voted in the voting process more so than he cheated to win in the first place, which we'll discuss in more detail later. But yeah, for black people, from that perspective, from ADOS people, we're looking. We need to keep the fight going. That's come as a result of these deaths and the realization and acknowledgement of institutional white domination racism. We need to do that. The fear is, and the bigger con, besides Biden and Harris being in there, is if we will lower our guard and sit back and relax, thinking, like through the Obama years, that they'll eventually do something good for us. And I don't doubt that they'll do something good for us at all. It's just that, will it be meaningful? Will it get us out of our bottom caste plight? And the answer there is no.
And that's it for this week's personality piece. Looking forward to seeing what we're not going to get. Biden Harris.
Gotta fight. Catch the fire. If you're ADOS, an ally or friend, we encourage you to connect with a local ADOS chapter and help change your local politics. Our ADOS Ohio chapter in Columbus meets every fourth Sunday of the month. For more information on the time and location, visit adoscolumbus.org. You can also get more information on the ADOS movement, our politics, and the agenda. Please visit ados101.com. In today's Rapid News Reports, we have some articles that you may have missed, all in some way affect you and your ADOS life. Up first, we have:
after Biden win, black activists demand reparations for slavery, police reform. Publication Yahoo News, author and writer Marco Della Cava. President-elect Joe Biden addressed supporters last week to accept the highest office in the land. He took a moment to thank one specific group of Americans. When this campaign was at its lowest, the African American community stood up again for me, Biden said. They always have my back, and I'll have yours. Leading Black Lives Matter activists plan to hold him and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris to the IOU with a vengeance. In a tumultuous election year, one that both gave rise to a new civil rights movement in response to the death of George Floyd and saw Black Americans suffer disproportionately from the COVID-19 pandemic and staggeringly high unemployment. Black Lives Matter activists are asking the new administration to make Black matters paramount. For decades, Black people have shown up time and time again for a country that consistently tells us that our lives don't matter, said Mary Hooks, a founding member of Black Lives Matter Atlanta and co-director of Southerners on New Ground, a social justice advocacy organization. Beyond a cheap thank you, we need this administration to be bold and unapologetic about paying that debt through enacting policy changes. I graded this article spicy. Some of us are not going to sit back and shut up. It's a different moment in time. I suggest both parties get to work. Political action doesn't stop with voting, it starts. And up next,
from the publication Yahoo News, entitled "Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders to be Frozen Out of Biden Cabinet," report says. Written by Matt Mathers. Left-wing politicians Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are reportedly set to be frozen out of President-elect Joe Biden's cabinet amid concerns the party could lose more seats in upcoming elections. Each side of the party is blaming the other for the poor results, which came after 4 years of White House chaos under Donald Trump. Anger has been fomenting within the party in recent days, and centrist Democrats say that with Mitch McConnell remaining as Senate Majority Leader, the party cannot afford to appoint figures viewed as socialists. The Biden administration has to be a lot more sensitive of where you come from if you're looking at members of Congress. Jerry Connolly, representative for Virginia's 11th Congressional District, told the publication, "We cannot afford to put any seats in jeopardy." The measured comments come as Mr. Biden prepares to confront dueling national cries that actively threaten the health, safety, and economic security of millions of Americans, irrespective of the political debate. Coronavirus infections, hospitalizations, and deaths are surging. The economy faces the prospect of long-term damage, and the nation's political and cultural divides may be worsening. I graded this report poor. This was a straight propaganda piece on so many levels. Centrists are in fact right, or in the least center-right. Therefore, referring to Sanders or Warren as socialist is just name-calling and false associations, because the policies they've advocated for are just right of FDR policies, which made the Dems the working class party. Well, no more. Lastly, the virus and economic calamity is exactly a very familiar scenario that involved the selection of Obama. Where economic austerity was justified, Obama got over 90% of ADOS votes, while we lost over 50% of our collective wealth. This article is not informing you. It's telling you what's coming, posing the information as though there's little choice. And next.
Black voters decided the U.S. election, and they're poised to reshape business. From the publication Triple Pundit, author and writer Mary Mazzani. Black Americans showed up in huge numbers to vote in the 2020 election cycle. Analysts say their massive turnout in major American cities, including Philadelphia, Detroit, Milwaukee, and Atlanta, played a key role in pushing Democratic candidates Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to presumptive victory in the presidential race. As outlets including the Black Information Network observed, those grateful for a Biden and Harris win can largely credit Black community organizers. The Movement for Black Lives summed it up neatly in an email to supporters on Saturday. This is a testament to the power of Black people and Black organizing. Due to mounting factors, Black Americans are increasingly poised to reshape the landscape of business too. A long-awaited wave of Black corporate executives may be around the corner. But numbers are just the start. And just one example, as racial justice protests spread around the world in response to the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, a growing number of companies put targets in place to increase the number of Black people and people of color in leadership roles. While many argue for good reason that pledges to increase leadership representation over the next 5 to 10 years pale in comparison to the changes that's needed, realizing these goals has the potential to bring hundreds, if not thousands, of new voices into the top brass of America's largest companies. And as is often said, you can't manage what you don't measure. Companies with right affirmative action plans which set goals see more progress towards diversity than companies that don't. Frank Dobbin, a professor of social sciences at Harvard University, told the Tribune News Service in September. Change in the area is sorely needed. Though Black Americans comprise more than 13% of the U.S. population, they account for just over 3% of executives or senior leadership roles at major companies, according to a 2019 study from the Center for Talent Innovation. I graded this article okay. Fair in that the writer has well intentions and is basically promoting this narrative that was provided by the media. I'm going to keep my initial thoughts on why I feel the hands that pick cotton don't pick presidents. I don't feel it was a blue wave and African Americans saved the day. I believe we need to believe that we did. And measures were made to tip that scale. I can't prove that, but I will say politics will have you believe in your own don't stink. And it does. What would be more believable is more white voters voted Democrat this time. Shocking, I know, but that's what I believe. Also, no one's said it yet, but they're lumping all people with melanin in this Black category. Maybe there was more Black immigrant related people that voted for Biden and the Harris ticket. But we will never know because we're all in this together. We're all the same. We're Black, we're the same. So we can't tell you how many ADOS voted for Biden and Harris. We can't tell you how many Haitians, Caribbeans, or Jamaicans, because they got us all lumped together under the word Black. So I guess we'll just be Black. And up next,
From the publication CNN, entitled, "To My Family Who Chose Trump Over Me. Was It Worth It?" Author Richard Eldridge. Like so many across the country, since the election of the 45th president, our family has been splintered. While these disagreements could previously be contained by setting sensible, no politics allowed ground rules for family gatherings, my mom first had to institute this during the Ronald Reagan administration. In the age of social media, these arguments now routinely spill into our online lives. In 2016, you voted for all of that, and after 4 years of insults, bullying, hundreds of heinous tweets, and thousands of documented lies, I know from other relatives that you doubled down and voted for that again. Even after 4 years of this person putting his character on daily display for the world to see, you decided his best represents the character and the values of this country. You decided he best represents your character and your values. To be clear, this was never about a difference of political opinion. We've gotten through that before. This was about a fundamental difference in morality, integrity, and decency, and a person who exemplifies none of these. I graded this fair. This is a white person's rantings regarding his family members' embrace of the Donald, which after years of arguments and broken family relationships over blatant racial insensitivities, outright hypocrisies, and downright white lies, he fails to grasp what should be painfully obvious, that he and many others like him in the white collective have been effectively mesmerized by white self-aggrandizing mythologies. Ask the indigenous and betrayed treaties. Ask ADOS and our reparations debt that is owed. While his family members get it. This is the essence of their clash. Cheating, scheming, dehumanizing whom they consider subhumans, and desecrating nature have all been the white man's burden's tradition for quite some time. Trump openly displays it for all to see. He just can't handle the truth. And next.
Fractured America. Distrust and an increasing racial divide. From the publication The Final Call, author and writer Anissa Muhammad. The tight presidential election revealed that America is divided against herself and further exposed racial tensions that have been growing over the course of 2020. While Joe Biden won the popular vote and Electoral College, a blue wave did not sweep the nation as predicted, and instead states became battlegrounds. The outcome of the election and the predicted blue wave that was going to sweep the country did not come to pass. Mr. Biden has to deal with a Republican-controlled Congress, Senate, and a House of Representatives that gain Republican members, said Abdul Halim Muhammad, the Southwestern Regional Representation of the Nation of Islam out of Houston. So regardless of what his agenda is, he's going to have to compromise and negotiate with a Republican-controlled Senate and an emboldened House of Representatives and the Supreme Court with a conservative majority. He said black people should have learned that they can't trust the corporate media or the political pundits. Their election didn't turn out the way that they predicted, he said, and what we should learn is that we have to build our own independent black political institutions. White people in this country showed us in this election that they will once again pick white supremacy over their health, said Dr. Greg Carr, chair of the Department of Afro-American Studies at Howard University. He saw exit poll data that revealed that an overwhelming number of white people who voted for Mr. Trump said Joe Biden would do a better job at handling COVID-19 than Donald Trump. Yet they voted for Donald Trump, meaning I picked my whiteness literally over my health and potentially my life. I would rather die than not support white nationalism, Dr. Carr said. He explained how voting is an act of self-defense for black people. And he said black people should learn how to vote out of the collective interest of the whole. Biden is not going to advance a black agenda unless he's forced, and even if he's forced, he's still not going to do everything we would want, which is why the day after he's certified and Harris is certified, we then look at the 2022 calendar, he said. I graded this article good. And up next,
from the publication The Africa Report, entitled Ghana's former president Jerry Rawlings has died. Tagline, Jerry Jr. Jesus Rawlings died Thursday morning at the Kole Bull University Hospital in Accra, where he had been admitted a week earlier. Writer The Africa Report staff. Rawlings led Ghana from 1981 to 2001. A former lieutenant in the Ghanaian Air Force, he participated in his first military coup in May 1979. His attempt failed and he was arrested, but later released a few weeks by a group of fellow officers, launching his political career. Jerry Rawlings quickly became leader and committed himself to returning the power to the civilians. The promise was kept. General elections were held, and 3 months later, Rawlings stepped down to make way for Hilla Liman, who had just been elected president. Jerry Rawlings was just over 30 years old and massively popular in Ghana. Disgusted by Hilla Liman's regime, whose corruption and bad governance he criticized, Rawlings took up arms again in December 1981. He overthrew Liman, took over the leadership of the Provisional National Defense Council, and established himself in power for a long time. Eventually, however, Ghana regained some normalcy. Under pressure from the opposition and the international community, Jerry Rawlings set his country on the road to democratization. In 1992, he resigned from the army and founded the National Democratic Congress, NDC. Democratically elected in 1992, he was re-elected in 1996 for a second term at the head of Ghana. In 2000, Rawlings was barred by the Constitution from running for a second term, so he endorsed his vice president, John Atta Mills, to run for another term. Atta Mills failed, but Rawlings remained the man who kept his promise and bowed out gracefully. I graded this report good. And next?
What Biden owes black voters. Tagline: Black voters helped save the president-elect's primary campaign and put him over the top in the general election. Now they want action. From the publication The Atlantic, author and writer Adam Harris. On February 29th, hundreds of Joe Biden supporters stood densely packed in the volleyball center at the University of South Carolina, and the room went silent as Brian Williams' voice blared through the loudspeakers. Polls had just closed in South Carolina, and MSNBC was ready to make a projection. Biden had won the state's Democratic primary. When Biden appeared on stage to speak, he knew what the victory meant. South Carolina has saved his candidacy. "We're back!" Biden yelled. The state that launched Bill Clinton and Barack Obama to the presidency has now launched our campaign on the path to defeating Donald Trump. Now that victory has been claimed. However, the president-elect will be expected to turn to action. Biden has typically leaned on moderate policies that have been piecemeal solutions to the problems Black Americans have faced, or policies such as the 1994 crime bill that have made life worse for Black citizens. On the campaign trail, he apologized for that bill and made significant leftward policy shifts. But now it's important that Biden follows through on most of the promises he made during the campaign. Mandela Barnes, Wisconsin's lieutenant governor, told me, "Black voters I've spoken with throughout the year have consistently expressed the feeling that politicians care about them only when they want their vote, then forget about them after Election Day." Surprisingly, in a July survey of Black voters in battleground states from American University, more than 60% of Black voters said they believed that elected leaders looked out for their interests. He wasn't shy about things that he said during the campaign, but now it's about coming through, Barnes said. Clyburn was certain when I asked him whether Biden would continue to listen to Black people now that they've helped deliver him a win. "Absolutely," he said. "And not because we want him to do it, but because he wants to do it." I graded this article okay, and Biden and Clyburn poor. Especially Clyburn. It doesn't matter what Joe Biden has in his heart or whether he wants to do anything or not. He was elected to do it, so he needs to get it done. And by it, I mean reparations in the Black agenda, Medicare for all, student debt elimination, increased minimum wage, you name it. But I have no hope that he will do it, whether he has it in his heart or not. And up next,
from the publication Law 360, entitled New York Bar Urges State to Consider Mandatory COVID-19 Vaccine. Writer Justin Wise. The New York State Bar Association is calling for the state government to at least consider making a COVID-19 vaccine mandatory once it's available. If medical experts agree that's the best route to getting the pandemic under control, it stipulates that a vaccine mandate would include exceptions for medical reasons and only be warranted in the event that there is a scientific consensus that immunity levels aren't thwarting COVID-19 spread and reducing mortality rates. It also said that any mandate must come after reasonable efforts to promote public acceptance of a vaccine, assessments of the virus threat in certain communities, and an agreement from medical experts about the safety and efficacy of the drug. I graded this report fair. I have been trying to warn my people. You are assisting in advertising the need for this vaccine with your compliance instead of seeking ways of improving your immune systems against any disease. Notice the statement in this piece. Only be warranted in the event that there is a scientific consensus that immunity levels aren't thwarting COVID-19. Your compliance with quarantining cheated your immune systems in the event of antibodies to fight off the virus and other diseases, which will be blamed on COVID this approaching flu season. Look to that being used as an excuse to make the vaccine mandatory. Please consider getting Cynthia McKinney's book, When Chinese Sneezes, From the Coronavirus Lockdown to the Global Political Economic Crisis, which addresses the most likely origins and motivations of those involved with the virus, as well as reveals the ethnographic nature of the virus, which is showing signs of inducing sterility, even in asymptomatic people. Now think, who is getting this disproportionately? And next.
Remembering when Obama and lobbyist David Plouffe used Al Sharpton to quiet accountability questions in Black America. From the publication Mogulum Nation, author and writer Ann Brown. Reparations is an issue that isn't going away, and Black America is looking to see what, if any, moves President-elect Joe Biden will be making. The Black community had high hopes when President Barack Obama was in the White House, but Obama didn't come through on reparations or any other significant measures to help close the racial wealth gap, critics say. Obama didn't support reparations either before or after he took office. When pushed to act, Obama used Black community activist Al Sharpton to quiet accountability questions, according to some observers. Former lobbyist David Plouffe worked closely with Sharpton. A Wall Street Journal report covered Sharpton and Obama's odd partnership. Odd because Obama often turned the tables on Black leaders. When faced with questions of accountability, Obama would hold the Black leaders accountable instead. In fact, Obama once told Black leaders to stop complaining during a 2011 Congressional Black Caucus annual dinners. Many felt insulted by Obama's tone. I know how much we have invested in making sure that we are able to move this country forward. More than a lot of other folks in this country, we know about hard, he said. The people in this room know about hard. Obama ended the speech by chastising the audience. Take off your bedroom slippers. Put on your marching shoes. Stop complaining. Stop grumbling. Stop crying, he said. A standing ovation was also accompanied by gas. The Time reported the speech was given at a time when Black people were asking Obama when would he help them. Meanwhile, Obama was cozying up to Sharpton to quiet accountability questions. So much so that former New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani complained that Sharpton had been invited to the White House up to 85 times. As more questions arose about Obama's lack of economic policies addressing the Black community, Sharpton emerged as an important part of the White House response, Wall Street Journal reported. On his national radio program, he is directly rebutting the president's critics, arguing that Obama is right to craft policies aimed at lifting all Americans rather than specifically targeting Blacks. I graded this article good. And Obama, Al Sharpton, and anyone that gave excuses as to why Obama couldn't do anything for the Black community, poor. And they're posed to do the very same thing for Biden and Harris. Excuses, excuses, and excuses. Meanwhile, our community stays the same. But you voted for them, Black people. You get what you vote for. And up next,
From the publication, The Soapbox, entitled Racial Tolerance Was on the Ballot, and won. Tagline, Trump's apparent defeat wasn't the only election result this week that suggested voters' growing support for a multiracial America. Written by Matt Ford. The defining story of the 2020 election is, of course, Joe Biden's apparent victory over Donald Trump. Though Democrats fell short of a once-in-a-generation landslide victory, they convinced a substantial majority of voters to reject an irredeemable racist. But voters across America, from reliably blue states in the Northeast to ruby red bastions in the South, also came out in favor of multiracial democracy in more subtle ways, even as they sometimes backed candidates with less tolerant views. In Alabama, roughly 2/3 of voters supported Amendment 4, which will rewrite the state's constitution to excise racist and obsolete language. Next door in Mississippi, voters overwhelmingly voted in favor of a new state flag to replace the one discarded by state lawmakers earlier this year. In the Northeast, Rhode Island became the first state to change its name after joining the Union. Though the state is most commonly known as just Rhode Island, its full legal name was the State of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. The amendment removes and Providence Plantations, which state lawmakers viewed as too closely associated with slavery in the American cultural lexicon. All of these measures are best described as symbolic, since they don't change any substantive laws or policies within those states. But I don't say that pejoratively. Symbolism proved to be a potent political issue during the Trump era, a marker of sorts for what kind of country Americans want to live in. I graded this opinion piece poor. Fair that the writer is drawing attention that the foreground of this election was white domination racism. How he concludes that a multiracial society won is erroneously delusional, given the records of the Biden-Harris team, however. Trash that he attempted to diminish how close the election is, and while doing the same with what he acknowledges symbolic gestures which he claims ushers in the love the white collective have for non-whites. It is a big white lie, or, like most progressive whites, he is just lying to himself in hopes of a white America that never was and is revealed with this election less likely to be. His failure to mention non-symbolic remedies, such as reparations, a debt that is owed, reveals in the least his subconscious duplicitous cooperation with white domination racism. And that's it for this week's Rapid News. All articles featured will be posted in our Facebook group and in the show notes on our website. Are you busy? Is the news coming so fast you can barely keep up? No worries. The Articles of ADOS podcast is here to help. Hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening right now, and we'll make sure you stay up to date on the news and information that affects you and your ADOS life.
Time now for the main event.
In this week's main event, we will interview the broadcast Bree Newsome and Professor Eddie Glaude. The Black Lives Matter movement helped the Democrats defeat Trump. From the news broadcast Democracy Now! We'll preface this with, as President-elect Joe Biden and his running mate Kamala Harris prepare to take power, we continue to look at the growing debate over the direction of the Democratic Party. House Majority Whip James Clyburn went on several Sunday talk shows to criticize calls to defund the police and argued the phrase hurt Democratic congressional candidates. It is actually insane that we would think the way to respond to the scale of problems that we confront as a nation is to hearken back to an older form of politics that seems to try to triangulate and appeal to this Reagan Democrat that they are so obsessed with, responds Eddie Glaude, author and chair of Princeton University's Department of African American Studies. It makes no sense that we would go back to the politics that produced Trump in the first place. We also speak to artist and anti-racist activist Bree Newsome Bass, who argues black voters are scapegoated when it's convenient and then we are thrown under the bus when it's convenient. That's a dynamic that has to end. Writer Amy Goodman. I Daud will ask the questions while Lisa will give the answers to Newsome, Bass, and Glaude's responses. Greetings to you both, Professor Glaude, Miss Newsome Bass. Welcome to you both. Miss Bass, can you talk about this major debate for the soul of the Democratic Party? Isn't what's at the heart of this debate a determination on the part of the Democratic leadership to further marginalize and supplant the issues and demands of ADOS?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, first of all, to this argument that is being made so fiercely right. Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, first of all, to this argument that is being made so fiercely right now, attacking the defund the police effort, I have yet to see anyone provide any concrete data that supports that claim, other than people making this conjecture. I mean, I live in the Carolinas. I have seen all of the ads that have been running. I mean, they were also running a lot of ads trying to tie Jamie Harrison to Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi. So, I mean, unless someone is showing data that can really show that one or the other is what led to Jamie Harrison specifically plateauing in South Carolina, which is a deeply red state, was an uphill battle against Lindsey Graham to begin with. I frankly don't give that a whole lot of weight. And I think, again, we cannot gloss over the racial aspect of this whole situation.
Thank you for getting to that. Continue, please.
So we're talking about a situation where the Democratic leadership is making the claim, simultaneously making the claim, that we need to reach across the aisle. We need to engage in bipartisanship with the party that is not acknowledging the election results, the party that just tried to prevent us from having a free and fair election, the party that engaged in rampant voter suppression, disenfranchisement, and intimidation, and particularly in communities of color. The party that is completely opposed to the idea of our existence. The party that is essentially advocating a form of genocide through medical neglect that has been ravaging our communities. And so we can't just gloss over when people are saying that the path forward is to build with Republicans and at the same time to essentially demonize, make a boogeyman of black activism and black causes.
So, by these remarks, are you indicating many in grassroots movements would say, finally facing, that at least the Democratic leadership members strongly desire a Republican strategic stance on issues rather than one based in working class and racialized ADOS communities?
Ro Khanna is exactly correct. It is the organizers, the same exact people who have been organizing black communities around issues that impact us, that mobilize those voters for the Biden-Harris win. I've also seen people making reference to progressives as being the ones who are being divisive or, ending the truce within the Democratic Party. And it's quite the opposite. You had a situation where you have a significant segment of people who either traditionally voted Democrat, a lot of people who were completely disengaged from the electoral process completely because they feel that regardless of who was in power, their needs are not met. Regardless of who was in power, the police continue to kill us. Regardless of who was in power, we do not have access to proper health care. We do not have access to housing.
I see you still refuse to openly admit that the Democratic Party leadership has betrayed their base and only desire to be Republican light in order to attract more of a largely white base. Or could you please admit that just getting Trump out wasn't enough? When the Democratic Party had two candidates running whose records were always attempts to appeal to the radical political right. Will you admit this?
So you had a lot of organizers who had to do a lot of heavy lifting to convince folks that it was worthwhile simply to get Trump out, to mobilize behind Biden and Harris. And that's why you got Georgia turning out as it did. That's why you got Arizona turning out as it did.
I understand if ADOS needs were only getting Trump out of office. Yet with an ADOS collectively being economically decimated at a tune of over 50% as a direct result of the Obama years, didn't ADOS deserve a variety of guarantees prior to our voting for Uncle Joe, in addition to getting Trump out? Weren't both goals worthy of the Democrats?
So in my view, for anyone to look at the election results and for the takeaway to be we need to figure out how to appeal to the Lindsey Graham voters, and the deeply red districts, as opposed to recognizing that there's an entire electorate that is younger, that represents where the electorate is going. It's younger, it's more diverse. It can win with states in the South. This is the argument that Stacey Abrams has been making for quite some time.
Still dancing around and away from my questions, I see. Yet you mentioned Stacey Abrams. While it was great, she coordinated a way that got a lot of typically suppressed voters to the polls. The type of black Democratic leadership she brings is highly questionable. Abrams bucked most Democrats in Georgia's General Assembly and made the unusual decision last to help Republicans rewrite state liability laws to make it much more difficult to hold bank executives and directors accountable for their predatory lending decisions. Georgia was ground zero for subprime lending practices that fueled the housing crisis and financial meltdown. For some reason, I believe all that on Abrams' part was her audition to Joe Biden as his running mate, which he slapped down on national TV. Is this the type of Democratic politician that represents grassroots ADOS organizers?
Exactly. Instead of looking at things and saying, how can we invest more in black and indigenous and people of color organizing, how can we really look at those issues? This is again going to what Ro Khanna was saying. Politically, that makes a lot more sense than saying, how do we tap into the electorate that lost the presidential election, the electorate that is shrinking, and then morally, the electorate that opposes democracy?
That's what I'm trying to get across. Abrams' actions in Georgia to the acts of Biden and Democratic leaders currently, are they not appealing more to the white elite predator class who is by and large anti-black, just like Republicans?
Excuse me, because they are more committed to racism than they are to the idea of democracy that allows everyone to participate. So, again, I just think that we cannot gloss over.
Okay, I'll try this route. Couldn't this be the reason Biden is attempting to reach out to such a morally challenged group, in your words, the electorate that is shrinking, in order to solidify and unify white elites and lower class whites who even supported Trump? As James Clyburn, similar to Abrams, has been long-term co-opted by the pharmaceutical and other white domination industries in South Carolina.
Yes, I recognize, of course, that James Clyburn is a long-standing politician from South Carolina. He is black.
As well as co-opted and corrupt, but continue, please.
And I don't, I'm sure that he recognizes what the political landscape is like in South Carolina. But if we're looking at the bigger picture, they're going to cost themselves the Senate race in Georgia if the case that they're making is that we're going to try to lean more towards Republican than making it clear to people that unless they turn folks out for those Senate seats in Georgia, we're not going to have access to the things that you need, like healthcare and all these other things. So if they embrace a more centrist or Republican agenda, then they take away from folks is going to be, again, that it doesn't matter whether they turn out to vote or not. So I think it's just like the complete opposite. And the fact that the focus in the immediate aftermath of the election, when we are still dealing with the situation of a president who does not acknowledge the election results, we've got him stoking violence among white supremacists who are threatening violence against sitting governors, who have threatened to blow up ballot counting centers, that folks would pick defunding the police as the target, as the threat, as the danger, when you're talking about the communities that are still being killed by police and still turning out to support this party in spite of that. Complete opposite direction of where they should be going.
Yes, despite the overall response from whites and the political right. Can you offer then a reason why the Democrats are obviously leaning right, while not seeing to their most loyal constituency in ADOS?
No comment.
Well, hopefully we can get a direct response to this obvious and continuing display of betrayal of ADOS by Democrats from Professor Eddie Glaude. Professor, given the obvious anti-ADOS stances of the Democratic Party and leadership, coupled with the obvious response by the white collective who have responded to this yet uncertified by state result of the presidency, what stance do you believe ADOS should take currently?
Well, there's a sense in which the reckoning that we find ourselves involves the question of whether or not we're going to fundamentally embrace the idea that we are a multiracial democracy. and the history of the country suggests that we constantly, when faced with that question, will double down on violence, that white America will choose violence to defend its way of life, to defend those noxious assumptions that have in some ways led to the organization of our way of life, predicated upon this idea that white people ought to be valued more than others, that they will in fact exact a certain kind of violence to defend that view. America is always talking about it changing, but it never changes, right?
Exactly. So how should ADOS respond or act on these many affronts to our political issues and our Democratic and Republican disregard of our liberties and lives?
And so what's so interesting about the conversation around the Democratic Party is that it's actually insane, right? That we would think that the way to respond to the scale of problems that we confront as a nation is to hearken back to an older form of politics that is DLC, third way, democratic oriented. Democratic politics that seems to try to triangulate and appeal to the Reagan Democrat, that they are so obsessed with as a way of responding to this problem. It makes no sense that we would go back to the politics that actually produced Trumpism in the first place.
Again, you are identifying this context correctly, but will you go further by being honest about this Democratic stance against progressives, which means do almost anything than cater to the needs of ADOS and how we should respond now? That we as a collective refuse to demand from them guarantees committed to our needs.
That's the first point. The second point is this. We can't allow these folks to disentangle Trumpism from the Republican Party. I think this is what Bree Newsome Bass is trying to suggest to us. We can't allow them to disentangle these two things. They are one and the same. What are you asking us to do when you talk about reaching across the aisle in unity? We won't do that again. That's not going to happen this time.
Well, sir, that's the essence of my question to you and Miss Newsome Bass, which she refused to directly answer. What is the concrete way you in academia and Miss Newsome Bass as an activist plan on making sure that a literal replay of the Obama era, which devastated black ADOS, is not going to repeat? We of the ADOS movement abdicated voting Democratic down ballot as a means to leverage our voting power within the Democratic establishment, exacting a price to the party we have bled for these past 60 years to drive them to submit directly to our needs and demands. Yet all our people are getting is black gatekeepers, the white domination racist media, as well as alternative media, puts in front of us, making moral and emotional pleas, taking our talking points or challenges for Democrats to do better. Yet we end up worse off.
And then lastly, we need to get beyond, I think, these narrow labels. The politics is much more muddled, right? We need to get beyond big government and small government and smart government and get to transformational government.
Transformational government. Where have I heard those words before?
We need to understand what defund the police means. Budget your values. Budget your values. That's what it means at the heart of it, right? Why are you spending 60 to 70% of your municipal budgets on policing when you have education and social services and the like? Stop lying. Stop lying.
Moral and emotional, please.
Lastly, I'll say this really quickly. We need to pay attention to who Biden appoints as his Secretary of Treasury. If we get another Rubinite, if we see someone in that tradition, we know what we got.
Is that a challenge I hear? For Democratic presidents to do better than Clinton, who appointed James Rubin, or Obama, who appointed Larry Summers, who was a Darth Vader to James Rubin's Palpatine?
And so remember, we celebrate yesterday and the day before, but today begins the hard work. The problems of this nation require us to break from the old frames. And we will not allow Clyburn, we will not allow Kamala Harris symbolic.
Wasn't your name among many who demanded Kamala Harris, the cop Harris, symbolic inclusion as Biden's BP?
And her significance. We will not allow the threat of Donald Trump to get us from seeing that is the issue. We have to break the political frame that got us in this mess in the first place.
All of those nice and tough words, and we are still in the same place, sir. waiting on Biden to do something for us, according to you. Who he picks as Treasury head will tell the tale. Well, let me tell you, sir and ma'am, he is going to pick a Reubenite. So what is a path we should take when, not if, when that happens?
You know, everybody is bringing up black men. When you look at black folk, when you think about what happened in Atlanta, when you think about what happened in Milwaukee, when you think about what happened in Detroit, when you think about what happened in Philly, you see the path for the Biden-Harris ticket to get to the White House through black America, black folk. Black men voted at 80% plus. They need to start talking about why white women have voted at 56% for Donald Trump, given what he's done. But again, who's the center of the gravity of our politics? Who are folks thinking about all the time in certain sort of way? We need to. These numbers will allow us to drill down at some point, but we need to understand the reality for what it is.
Your thoughts about that, Miss Newsome Bass?
Yes, I mean, I think there is this constant abusive relationship between the party politics and black communities where we are scapegoated when it's convenient and then we're thrown under the bus when it's convenient.
History bears that out.
And otherwise, it's, show up to the polls to help us stay in power because we can't get elected without you. And that's a dynamic that has to end. When it's time to try to scapegoat and talk about, why did Trump do better? Then they want to talk about black men. When it's time to talk about the issues and why 80% of black men turn out to vote for Biden. No one wants to talk about defunding the police. That's the dynamic that has to end.
Thank you for realizing this connection. There is a direct connection between the Democratic Party, Democratic sycophants in the media, and the CIA that has long influenced what all Americans are exposed to in the white domination racist media. This is a clear divide and conquer strategy by these groups who are unified on the demographic reality of white dwindling numbers and non-white growth numbers by the mid to late 2040s, where the largest remaining minority numbers will be ADOS, not the artificially created Latinx. We at Articles of ADOS podcast pointed out how the term and peoples were constructed primarily during the Nixon administration to undermine the power of the black electorate. Sadly, way too many among us have fallen for that big white lie, just like Russia Hackingate, which in particular was also used against ADOS, where they attempted to Russian bot us to death.
And I think the last thing I would say is it's important for everyone to recognize that the black movement, the black organizing of our communities, that is independent of the Democratic Party. We are interacting with party politics, but this movement began during the Obama administration. It continued through the Trump administration, and it will continue through the Biden administration. We're not altering our agenda based on what the Democratic leadership decides.
Yet you and Professor Glaude still haven't clearly articulated how you all are going to assert your will upon the Biden-Harris administration. Since 2012, our children have been in levels of poverty black children have not experienced since the Second World War. This means our children need relief now. In the last 8 months of the Obama administration, he cut $8 billion over the following 10 years from aid to families with dependent children, and you both are saying to me and our listeners, you both are only willing to plead for Democrats to do better, as though creepy Uncle demented Jim Crow Joe Biden and Kamala the cop Harris will. Oh well. Well, that completes this interview. Listeners, you can get the link to the full report on our website in this week's show notes. Coming up, we have the commentary on this broadcast. Did we like it? Did we hate it? Stay tuned.
We want to take the time to give our friends and listeners a shout out. Thank you for clicking that subscribe button and for liking and sharing the podcast. You can also continue supporting the show by joining our Patreon, where you can receive exclusive content and promotional items for as little as $3 a month. Sponsoring the show will ensure that we can continue to bring you the news and information important to your ADOS life. So head on over and join us at patreon.com/articles of ADOS. All right, so what did we think of this broadcast report? I actually listened to it. A lot of times I don't get the chance to, but I wanted to be able to give a good analysis of the main event this week. So I gave it a listen.
Highly problematic. I'm sorry, did I interrupt?
No, go ahead.
Highly problematic. And they're using better words to say that we're not like we were when Obama came in, but the end result is we're going to respond like we did when Obama came in. That's what it said to me, and it's very problematic.
Well, I like that Bree Newsome had to defend. I don't think she sees it, but she had to defend her progressive side of things with defunding the police, with the old tropes of James, whatever, and his stands, and seeing that, you know, the progressives and the Democratic Party are the problem and not necessarily the true enemy. What she's trying to say is the Republican side, he wants to reach across the aisle with. So there's a clash there, and the progressives of the Democratic Party don't want to admit that their party is failing them, and maybe is something else out there that they could assist in building up to fight against that. Because sometimes, you know, I think Jimmy Dore says this a lot. You don't go into the Democratic Party to change the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party will change you. Something to that effect.
I know what you mean.
And so she's in it fighting with these Democrats when you obviously have a different agenda, a different way of politics that you want to do, and it's not there, sis. The Democratic Party is not your party. You have a whole different way of ideology that they do not have. And I kind of see that kind of conflict with ADOS too, but we try to play Project Takeover, or, you know, not give up something that we built, not give up something that we overwhelmingly vote for, and try to push that change and force that change. But this Democratic Party is like the Republican Party, and that they play whatever politics to get in power. That's who you're going to be fighting. Progressives are going to constantly be fighting Democrats.
And that's a reality at the turn of the last century that's also taking place now. Power has decided to heal the split, and they did so during the Clinton era. White elites have unified and have stronghold their power and abilities to hand out cash donations to Nancy Pelosi, to other Democratic leaders, so that they would do their bidding. Oh, very similar to what the biddings are of the Republican Party heads. And this has been long acknowledged, but nobody's really put their foot down, in my opinion, until ADOS. A large idea that has gathered steam, created a movement among the grassroots that could possibly change things. The reality is it still has a way to grow and to heal itself, to become the juggernaut it really needs to be, and that it needed to be during this election period. In other words, getting at least a significant number, 30-40% of the black electorate to vote Democratic down ballot. If that would have happened, then we would have had still the voting potential outcomes, but highly noticeable that black people are tired of being taken advantage of, and therefore more willing to sit at a table. Notice no overtures to Mr. Ice Cube right now. They're going to let the media do with him as they will, which is to turn him into a poison pill so they won't have to listen to him. So there will not be a direct link to specific demands that deal with both a black agenda, let alone reparations. So we need to be prepared for that. And these two people, Professor Glaude and Miss Newsome Bass, are ultimately pinning themselves as the old guard gatekeepers, as they utilize a lot of our talking points and also realize that black people are just tired of taking it, and they're speaking to that, but still offering the same old cyclic behavior that we have to basically submit ourselves in the hope for a conclusion that Biden and Harris will do what's right for us. They are not going to be motivated to do so. What they will do, they will give out table scraps at some point to say that they've done something, and that'll be it. While the bulk of us will still be in misery.
I think a lot of this is in the fight for the Georgia seats, I believe.
Yeah, that's remaining. Mm-hmm.
So, you know, in Bree's defense, I know she's at odds with ADOS, but she is right in the fact that a lot of the turnout wasn't from the Democratic Party. It was from grassroots organizations like hers. I'm not really familiar with hers, but ADOS movement, a lot of the Black media voices online, a lot of organizations that were just, trying to inform people about their vote. Now, you can't tell people how to, but you inform them, you make sure they are registered, it's a constant thing you have to do in the Black community. Apparently, no other community needs this type of sort of engagement every election. So it can be overwhelming as a registered voter to deal with the voting system in America. So I do agree with her on that it came from the grassroots up.
But the challenge is, besides identifying how they got support, is how is that support going to benefit the people who's given that support?
Yeah.
And this is overwhelmingly a betrayal. The stance that Clyburn has taken, the stance that the Biden-Harris team have obviously taken, it's an obvious betrayal. These people just didn't want to come out and say that it's an obvious betrayal. Yep. What they wanted to do, with the help of Amy Goodman, was to further validate the BLM movement by associating it with Biden's win. It wasn't the BLM movement. It was Black grassroots people tired of the fears and justified problems with the Trump administration, which was sold overwhelmingly to Black people as a reason to get out and vote. So, okay, that worked. The problem is that there were no demands met prior to that would guarantee a return for that vote. We ended up doing the same thing we've done the past 60 years. I can go back further, but I'll say the past 60 years. And that has rung a death knell, especially during the Obama years. And it's going to potentially ring that same death knell through the Biden-Harris years. That's what they'll take from it. That even though we're doing a lot of grumbling out there, which is why it's so important for ADOS movement to get its act together in terms of the next 2 to 3 years, it's so important that happen, because they will just rely on treating Black folks the same old way. There's no reason to change, especially given the setup that we read in the earlier rapid news segments, where the economic situation is such that Biden and Harris will justify offering austerity measures, nowhere near reparations, nowhere near a Black agenda, let alone medical benefits for all, which got a 70% positive go from Fox News viewers. The reason why the race was so close was not because of progressive movements like Defund the Left, which I don't agree with. It was so close because the people did not get tangible returns for their votes. So people saw a need to continue to back Trump, both for protest as a way of we can possibly deal with him because he's a businessman and because he's really not an insider, and the way he's been treated is evidence that he's not an insider. So there were the reasons why it's so close. What more importantly was the reason why it was so close is because the Democrats, besides the ADOS group in America, largely American working class, were not getting anything directly from a Biden candidacy. And that's what made it so close. And they knew it was going to be so close. I'm very aware of that.
All right. Well, that's it for this week's commentary on the main event. Check back next week to see what we think about a thing or two.
Today in Serious Question with Daud, that's me. I'll take a listener's question and give commentary on any topic, whether social, economic, cultural, or political. Serious questions get serious answers. Send your questions to daud@articlesofados.com. Our question today comes from our very own Lisa Todd.
Yeah, I had to throw my question in the hat because I need answers. And my question is, who wins when both parties participate in election fraud tampering?
The short view. Answer. I'll answer with a headline. California unemployment. Why is Bank of America draining EDD bank accounts? Tagline. Bank of America has been draining money out of countless EDD accounts, leaving many Californians bewildered and broke. EDD accounts were set up for workers in response to America's lockdowns. It's what a lot of white people got in California. The white elite predator class wins. That's a quick answer to the question. That's who wins in election fraud tampering. Party affiliation is ultimately and serves as a distraction for America's little people, who I believe Hamilton referred to landless American peasant class as the rabble. Such agreed upon corruption, like we have involving voting access and counting, is one among many mechanisms which allows for an ongoing destabilization of democracy that we no longer have. The fraud and tampering of the election by both Republicans and Democrats is just a display of what the Princeton study concluded in 2014, which determined that we no longer exist in a representative democracy. We live in an operational oligarchy with fascist tendencies. The Bank of America taking the EDD funds is an act taking place within a fascist state. Steve Mnuchin never paid for the black families and others he illegally targeted and displaced from their homes, also illegally. That's oligarchic fascism. Steve Mnuchin, that our first potential black female vice president assisted to become Trump's finance secretary. All continuing references to America as a democracy where voting should mean something is done out of ignorance of these facts, or are the expressed efforts of capitalist apologists or outright propagandists. Now for the long view. From Brother T. West from Afro Synergy News on YouTube Broadcasting. States have not certified the results yet, so how is the media declaring Biden the winner? You are witnessing a propaganda operation in progress. When Dr. Fauci and the Surgeon General flipped from first saying that masks weren't needed to masks were needed, all you witnessed there was them getting on code with that propaganda operation. With Greg Palast, whom we featured on our podcast here, his research since the 2000 election revealed that black men were accused of being felons, so they were removed from voting, and electronic voting also flipped Gore votes to Bush Jr. through the voting company Diebold. The electronic system in Georgia would later contribute to this same outcome by doing its dirty deeds to Representative Cynthia McKinney, contributing to her loss there. Because of this, she was in talks with a black man inventor by the name of Ethan Gibbs, who developed an electronic voting system that could not be corrupted. On his way to presenting it for the state of Ohio, he was hit by a truck that was idling outside his residence for over an hour. When he took off in his car on his way to Ohio to present his fabulous electronic voting system, he was hit by this truck. Oh well, it was just an accident. According to Greg Palast, after the 2000 election, there was a gentleman's agreement among white predator class for Democrats and Republicans not to hold either group accountable for each other's participation in fraudulent elections. This should not be a surprise. They have the same gentleman's agreement with regards to gerrymandering. Where they don't agree, that's where they fight it out. Yet they agree in about 90% of such districts. This is why Clyburn goes repetitively unchallenged, despite doing a poor job serving his constituents. While serving well, Democrats do not mind using the same tactics during the primaries. This got rid of Sanders twice, while Republicans use these same tactics during the general, where Obama just overwhelmed the fraud with his popularity. He knew about this, and that was his response. I'll just have to overwhelm the illegal fraudulent vote suppression Republicans do, because he knew Democrats do it too. Democrat turned Republican Trump merely used these methods to win in 2016, where he beat out Hillary Clinton's cheating. Hillary's cheating was revealed during Jill Stein's challenging of the voting process in Wisconsin. Interesting how the media made fun of and marginalized her for that, just like they are doing Trump now, where it was revealed in Wisconsin that several hundred votes were flipped in Hillary Clinton's favor versus Trump, which is why the recounting in Michigan that had been started was stopped, and the recounting in Pennsylvania that Ms. Stein had also requested there never even got started, on the grounds that doing so would ruin the public's perceptions of America's fair elections process. I kid you not. And our friend Ben Swann, on November 10th our friend Ben Swann reported that election fraud is not a conspiracy theory, because that is what Trump and his supporters are being called right now. He is doing a state-by-state assessment of the complaints lodged by the Trump administration and others. This is what the fourth estate in America should be doing. Instead, the white domination racist media is calling it, at the behest of the CIA, domestic and international white elite predators not aligned with Trump's white elite predators. Mr. Swan is sifting out the valid from the invalid and presenting the valid fraudulent practices because the public is literally not allowed to see them, let alone know that they are valid, especially without denunciations or conspiracy theory name calling. So let's take the first state in his series, Nevada. A poll worker in a sworn affidavit describes how poll workers took loads of mailed-in ballots, opened them up, and filled them out. In another case, poll workers were described to have formed a human wall shielding people who were filling out ballots and placing them in envelopes. To date, nothing has been done to address this, while Trump is taking this along with other allegations to court. Of course, there are more voting improprieties in Nevada, Pennsylvania, and other states. You are just not supposed to see them as that. You are only to see them as Trump attempts to be a dictator, or the spoiled brat racist narcissist president can't stand to lose. All of which the population has been more than appropriately conditioned to conclude, and Trump did his job in helping you come to that conclusion. Let me finish with another thing about this election. We, the people, are not being told. As the white domination racist media declares Biden-Harris the winners, the breakdown, what we know generally about who voted for Trump and Biden, let us take the class group view instead of the racial view. Elites in this society overwhelmingly voted for Biden. Working class voters overwhelmingly voted for Trump. Who owns the media? That's who benefits. That's who usually wins. I knew there would not be a blue wave. That too was propaganda, as was the attack on black men to corral black men to get in our right plantation space because they knew it was going to be close. They ended up losing more black women. Funny that. That can't be mentioned in polite society, of course. With Democrats allowing Trump to load so many judges, I believe that Trump would use those judges to win by a nose, ultimately by stopping the count. Turns out they, Democrats, CIA, domestic and international white elites, found a multitude of ways to out-cheat Trump. We will see the effects of this in the courts, if the courts are allowed to go anywhere with this. The reality is that I was not totally correct because Trump did not cheat enough. So they, Democrats, CIA, domestic and international white elites, will most likely pull this one off. Please note that in 2000, they were the Republicans, CIA, domestic and international white elites. The more things change, the more things stay the same. So the white elite predator class wins again. Interesting this time how it was the vast numbers of blacks who, unlike other stances with the working class in 2000, turns out we voted with the white elites this time. I know some of us were dancing with what the media told us to believe about the election so far, but that's going to wear off one day, or at least 100 days from now, as nothing of significance will be done for us yet again. Voting Democratic down ballot could have made a difference. Oh well, white domination racism makes everybody crazy.
Thank you for answering that question, sir.
You're welcome.
Everybody but us wins, right?
Everybody but us wins.
Yeah.
And we voted with super white elites. Imagine that.
People, we are conservatives as well. We're conservative.
But that's
we're
not
on
what
the
drove
same
that.
Side of
But that's not what drove it. What drove it was he wasn't Obama, he wasn't black, and he was so racist that was a way to get at him. But what made him dealable, working at dealable, which Ice Cube could be said to have tried to do, is the fact that he wasn't an insider. The problem is he was still class-based and therefore appealing to white elites that were not aligned with these international white elites. So that's the distinction. It's difficult to sometimes put your foot on and therefore create a path from, but it's obvious in how this election is turning out and who voted for him that it was in the interest of white elites that they wanted him out of there because he wouldn't follow their path entirely. But the problem is they both had in common their racism, their anti-blackism. But that meant that Trump was the better one to deal with, not these super white elites who behind Biden and Harris have won.
So that's a testament to what Yvette usually
Yes.
says, and that is that we voted with our class enemy. So
Yes.
if the class enemy is our enemy because they're keeping us in our bottom caste.
Exactly.
So if we're voting we're voting for our own
Yes.
caste.
Yes.
Okay.
And that was what was so important for us to have demands upon Biden and Harris. I knew they were going to have white elite approval because Trump doesn't come from them. That's the same reason why he put in Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh is a part of that super white elite CIA connected international thing. Why would Trump pick him? It's the same reason why he picked Barr, but that goes into the sex stuff with what's his name?
Hunter.
Steen.
Oh, Jeffrey.
Which is why he put Barr in there. But that takes us off course a little bit. But the primary thing is that Trump is aligned with different donors similar to the Democratic donors, which is why they agreed on so many policy issues that the news didn't focus on. They just focused on how crazy he was. And that's how we could have dealt with him in a second term. But we won't have that. We'll have the possibility of having good people in our corner through Biden and Harris, which is the same card played by Obama. And we know how that ended. So we've not only aligned ourselves with the super elites that backed Obama, we've aligned ourselves with the same potential outcome, which made us voting Democratic down ballot so important this time. Now, I don't think all is lost because we didn't, but we are worse off because this is happening to us again, and we should be better than what we're doing now. The problem is we're not. And so it really means that we, as the ADOS movement, really need to get our act together internally and define a definite path that these people will be able to be willing to submit themselves to when we go into.
They're going to have a. Sorry for
yeah.
cutting you off,
If we don't have it by 2024, then it's really going to be difficult to have it by 2026 or 2028. And that means if by 2028 we're not solidified, unified, and getting that 5 to 10% of black folk voting in ways and activists in ways that are needing and adherent to reparations and a black agenda, I'm not going to be around much after that.
Well, the point is that we're going to need to be a place where those people who are disillusioned by the Democratic Party can find a space to come to.
Exactly.
So, we're hoping that it builds in that way. It's going that way. So.
Yeah. The misery index.
Yeah. All right.
We're coming to get our check.
There you have it. Another week, another show. Thanks for joining us on the Articles of ADOS podcast. Make sure to visit our website, articlesofados.com, where you can join our mailing list and see the show notes for today's episode.
Be sure to tune in next Friday for a new episode of Undiscussed News you may have missed. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send us an email to listeners@articlesofados.com.
And remember, you can catch us live at 10 a.m. every Friday on WCRS 92.7 and 98.3 here in Columbus, Ohio. Also head over to our Patreon page to support the podcast as we give you weekly news and information important to our community. Until next time, family, stay safe and stay strong. Peace.
We're coming to get our check. We're coming to get our check. We're coming to get our check.